Hello, hello.
Hi,
How you doing,
everybody.
John?
Moderate to middling, and yourself?
Okay, well, that's pretty good, right? On the Johnometer, that's quite good sometimes.
It's okay. The weather is enjoyable, and we've got a hot topic to dive into today.
We do, we
For
do.
so to set some background for you, dear listeners slash viewers, and if you want to see our faces, you can. I think if we upload this
Yeah, back on
onto the
YouTube.
YouTube.
We'll be back on YouTube.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I find the notion of a video podcast ridiculous, but that seems to be what people like. So, over the past couple of months, maybe more, I've been receiving apocalyptic communiques from you by text
Yeah.
message as you
The
have
end is
dived,
nigh.
yeah, yeah, dived ever deeper into the world of the stock market, trading, looking at GameStop, people trading these shares, hedge funds, short selling. And so, yeah, I mean, it's quite disturbing getting these, although not entirely consistent. That you're like, okay, this is going to happen, so you definitely shouldn't buy shares. No, wait, you should only buy shares. So I'm glad I've mostly done nothing in response, but
Just waiting for the extra. Yeah.
you seem to have found a deep dive tunnel that you've gone down, and you seem quite excited about it.
Oh, it's kind of fascinating in a morbid sort of way, but also in the potential for change because the catastrophe that's on the horizon. And to me, now it's more of a question of how far away it is rather than when it will happen, rather than if it will happen. Has the potential to sort of slingshot major changes in how society is structured. Because I don't think this time they'll be able to kind of just pat it back into nothingness like they did in 2008, where one person went to jail that probably shouldn't have, but other than that, nothing was done. In fact, some regulations were relaxed, making things even worse for this one. That's going to come somewhere between now and 2022.
So, what is the catastrophe that you are foreseeing?
Well, it's not one specific thing, but we basically increasing the fragility of everything because we refuse to do things that are a little bit painful in the short term to try and avoid problems in the long term. And so we are increasing problems, It's like, if you don't
Problems
look
in
after
what?
yourself and you don't... Sorry, go
Is
on.
this is the financial system? Or you're saying you're speaking
Everything,
very
because
generally.
also there's other problems. So the financial system is one thing, but also now climate change is on the verge of becoming a major force in what will happen to us. When the two things combine and you have an economic catastrophe and also perhaps on the same year an ecological catastrophe, you can imagine what could happen when the world's already stressed. If there's not enough clean water and there's not enough money and a heat wave means that like 100 million people on the coast of East Asia have to move. Like, we are increasingly adding points of failure. This is kind of my thesis is around the fragility of the society. If you have a car that has one part that you got for cheap secondhand because you didn't want to pay full price when it broke, you have a danger that your car might fail, but, maybe you'll last a little bit. But if you start just, doing shit repairs on your car so that every part has a 1 in 100 chance of failing, and you have 10,000 parts, each with a 1 in 100 chance of failing and breaking your car, the likelihood that your car will stop, it gets higher and higher. People don't understand that. Yeah, each thing might not happen, but together, the likelihood increases. And we've seen this with COVID, right? People go, oh, it's fine, we'll delay the vaccine. What could happen? The second dose. Well, it turns out that if you let 1 billion people get infected in India, eventually one will have a mutation that might increase the danger of the virus not being repealed by the vaccine, which is what we're seeing now. That if people have only had one shot of AstraZeneca vaccine, they only have 30% defense against the virus instead of the 60 that it was originally for one dose.
Well,
So
AstraZeneca sucks
if you buy
anyway,
a billion
but yes.
lottery ticket, yeah, each lottery ticket you buy has a very small chance of winning. But if you manage to buy $100 billion lottery tickets with random numbers, you might win something. And that's kind of what we're doing with everything. Our political choices, our economical choices, our healthcare choices. We're sort of betting that we'll be lucky, but on everything. So the points of failures are multiplying, and together they have synergy.
So is
If
this the
that makes
realm of
sense.
existential risk? Are you diving into this increasingly big field, or are you seeing it through those
It's just
lenses or not?
everything's tied together, right? Nothing exists in isolation. And so within systems such as the economy, there's heaps of different problems. But the economy is not a standalone thing. The economy fits into the global kind of social, political sphere. So, for example, what China is doing in the Philippines seas, overfishing there has economical impact, ecological impact, and political impact. And each of those things could trigger further impacts like sanctions, which then force the country to do something else, which could trigger problems in the economy and it's all tied together. But specifically, we're going to talk about the economical disaster, which then could feed into all of these other things that we have to worry about anyway.
So, how did this begin? That you started getting excited and interested in this field, and let's hear the personal journey, because just saying everything's going to fail is not an interesting or fun podcast. It's just upsetting.
No, it's not. Yes, that's just the start to give you context as to sort of my current state of mind and what led me into things. But I think the real trigger that led me to maybe I should learn a lot more about this rather than having cursory knowledge of some of the implications. Just because I like to be a polymath, I like to sort of read things, but I didn't really deep dive into any of it. But I saw a graph that showed the inflation-adjusted economical value. I think it was of the United States specifically throughout history. And showing each economical crisis, like the Great Depression, 2008, the dot-com boom, as dips on the graph, and then the rise afterwards of the level of money in society because of the increases in technology, production, population, and so on. And when adjusted for inflation and for sort of dates, actually, the Great Depression barely even registers as a blip. Because it was huge back then, but in comparison to the trillions in the economy these days, it's not that much, that dip.
Mm-hmm.
But, the dot-com boom, it's quite recent. The dot-com boom and then crash, that's quite recent. And it's a bigger dip, and it's quite significant. And you can see that the economy is actually going really well before, at least on paper. This whole thing that politicians go, especially Trump, it's like, look how good the stocks are doing. Everything's fine. But actually, it's usually a signal that things are fucked up, because when the stocks are going really well, but people are saying, I can't eat, it's usually right before something really goes strange, because the stocks have been artificially inflated in value.
How do these things connect, though? That if you can say the economy's going well, but what you mean is that more people are putting their money into stocks and shares, and that's not then feeding into people's everyday lives the money that they have unless they own those stocks and shares.
Yeah. Not more people, more 1%ers usually. And that's a combination of relaxation of regulations and certain changes in how politics are done that happen cyclically usually. And you can see that, for example, after Clinton relaxed some regulations in the stock market, things kind of started to go upwards. But he himself was kind of inheriting a system that Reagan had already started to relax. And each time the cycle gets bigger, so the whoop and boom, the up goes higher and the boom goes lower. And essentially, money is being siphoned by those in power, by those that have no power. And you can see this by the fact that the minimum wage has, in most countries, not increased very much at all. And if you actually look by inflation, it's decreased significantly. So in America, they're now fighting for a $15 minimum wage, and they're getting told no, when really $15 would actually just keep it at what it was 10 or 15 years ago in terms of purchasing power. It's equivalent to $7, which is what it is right now. So it wouldn't be an increase. It would just be a status quo. To remain on par, it would have to be $25 an hour to remain on par monetarily. And to actually be on par in terms of level of production, it's like how much more human beings are able to create because of technological improvements, it should be even higher than that. But that increase in work that society's been doing. So we're doing more work, better work because of computers, because of internet and so on. The increase in our ability to create wealth and, you know, prosperance for society has not gone back to the people doing it. All that extra money has been going to the owners, the people that own the companies, the people that, you know, are at the very tippy top, through political donations, through shares buyback schemes, through the ability to not have to pay tax. And they don't put that money back in the economy. You know, the whole trick of the trickle-down economics. You know, if you make the rich richer, they'll create jobs. Actually, for them, the best thing to do to make sure that money doesn't lose value, because inflation will make money lose value, is to not keep it as money, but invest it. And what they do is they invest it in shares and they invest it in property, which is why it's increasingly hard to buy houses, and why it's increasingly more. The stock market is increasingly worth more, even though the companies that shares are being purchased of aren't worth more. You know, Tesla's shares, if you look at a per earning ratio, are way overpriced. But people are buying it because it's better.
What do you mean per earning ratio? What does that mean?
So Tesla doesn't make enough cars to justify its share price. It doesn't earn enough money, and its long-term projections and difficulties with production and delivering cars and so on mean that it's unlikely to change soon, and therefore the speculation that it'll be worth as much as, you know, it is on paper is false. It's very unlikely. You're betting that suddenly they'll be able to produce 10 and sell 10 times more cars for the share price to be true. And that's math that other people have done. You know, there's people that are really into this kind of stuff will go and calculate, well, for the share price to for the company to be worth this much, it means they should sell this many cars per quarter, which means that they would have to grow this much in this much time. That doesn't seem right. But, you know, Elon Musk is popular. People are excited about electric cars. And so it's a safe bet because other people are doing it as well. So the price goes up. So by putting money there, even if the company is not making money, you know the share price will go up. So if you ever need to cash out, your money will be worth more than if you kept it into a savings account.
Well, there's so many things coming up here, but to home in on this, like, isn't this just the nature of value, that things don't have an inherent worth? It's a perceived worth, and what we perceive is, oh, well, we think gold is worth whatever we think it's worth, as the classic example. And then with Tesla, people are buying into an idea. I mean, that doesn't seem new at all. Why is this?
No, but the scale of it is new. And also there's a increasing separation of abstraction. So it's true that things are valued because we give them value, but there's also real value. You can say water is worth a lot regardless of whether you give it value or not, because even if you don't think it's worth much, if you don't have it, you're going to die. So there's things that have real value. So gold, for example, is an example that people usually say it's not really worth anything. Actually, right now it is, because we use it in electronics. Actually, a lot of chemical processes use it as a catalyst. There's a real worth to it in terms of what we want society and ourselves to be able to do. It's hard to pin an exact monetary number on that, as opposed to the monetary value of the increase given by our perception of it, but there is something intrinsic about it. But increasingly, we're creating extra abstraction loops. So I'll give you an example that's quite relevant, and also you might, if you've seen The Big Short, ties it all back into the economy. So you've seen The Big Short, right?
Yeah, back in the day when it was fairly fresh, so I haven't seen it recently.
I recommend rewatching it. But there's one point where they discover that there are people that have packaged up all the worst loan packages that exist into a new thing called a CDO, which then allows them to basically wash how shitty an investment all those little shitty ones are, because there's so many of them that on average out, it looks like a good investment because it looks like it's what they call hedged, like you've hedged your bets because there's so many of them. But if you have to rely on 1,000 friends that never show up to help you move, it doesn't matter that you were calling 1,000 of them. If none of them ever show up, it's still a bad bet. And that's what a CDO was. It's an extra level of abstraction between what was already a level of abstraction, because you weren't investing in a mortgage, which was a bet on a house, which is already a level of abstraction, but you're investing on a package of a package of a package. And then
So
they do
can we
what's what they,
can we put this in a metaphor because it's
yes,
abstract. That's the point you're making. But can you
yeah,
tell
yeah.
me it in terms of like buying things in the shop? Like I don't mean literally, but like you're buying a shopping basket and another shopping basket, something like that, to get our heads around it.
Yeah, sure, sure. Let me see. I want to try and make it a metaphor that actually kind of makes sense. So give me a second to try to frame it well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, hmm. Well, let's go with the shopping basket. But so you have your own shopping basket, like with some stuff in it. That's your house, right? You don't have enough
And
money to buy that food, so you ask me for a loan. I give you a little bit of money to buy the food. That's the mortgage, and I charge you an interest rate. You're a pretty good friend, so you'll pay me back right away because you feel guilty about the money. But I also lend a similar amount of money to Jamie to buy his food because he wants to eat different foods from you because he's become gluten free. But for whatever reason,
I would never
his
allow it.
I'm sorry, poor Jamie. I picked you for the bad loan, but his mortgage is not a good one. Like the loan I give him, I'm unlikely to receive back. And as a bank, I'm prepared to do that because I know that you'll pay me back, and my other friend will pay me back, and so on. But I'm being encouraged by, sort of, by my dad. Let's say he wants me to have more money, to loan more money to more people. And he's making it easy for me because he's loaning me money at a low interest rate. So now I go and look for more people like Jamie because I don't care. I get money anyway from my dad. And it's easier to find people that want money if they can't pay me back. And that was kind of the subprime mortgage loan thing, right? So now I have 100 sort of Jamies not paying me back the loan that I gave them to buy their shopping. But
And what's your
what do I do?
motivation for loaning to more people who can't pay you back? Because you get to
Incentives
have,
from my dad, because my dad is paying me to do it and
but
giving me
couldn't you
really good
just
interest rates if I do it.
so you're how are you benefiting? Like you have the appearance of expanding your portfolio, which looks good. So you look like you're a mover and shaker. It's not just that he gives you
And
the money to do it,
I get
'cause you could
money.
choose
I
not
get
to,
actual money, but I get actual money,
but
like
money
for the
that you
like I
loan.
basically not just no. You actually get a cut of it, and
Oh,
special
okay,
like deals on interest rates and things like that.
okay.
And then what I do is like, well, these are a little bit dog shit, but what I can do is, I know that our friend, let's pick a friend, Jacques wants to invest stuff. So I don't go with him and say, hey, would you like to buy some of the loans I've got? They're great. What I do is I wrap them all up and I say, you should invest in my super shopping fund. And the super shopping fund thing has all those bad loans that I gave out into one thing, and it says this fund has loans of £1 million worth of equity, and it's got this kind of return rate over 10 years. It's a great deal.
So
Cool.
you're trying to get him to buy the loan from you. So you have all these people owing you money and they have to pay interest and so on. And you're saying, "Hey, I'm willing to sell you this situation so you'll be earning some of the interest
Yeah.
from
But he
these
doesn't
people
see
who
the
owe me."
individual loans. What he
Hmm.
sees is one product that includes a bunch of different things. And he doesn't necessarily know what all those things are. He doesn't know if they're all loans for shopping or if I've included a couple of, payday loans to make sure you can pay rent to people. He doesn't know that. He just sees this kind of product that says, whatever it does, it's a portfolio of investment.
Hmm.
So already, if you wanted to do due diligence on it, you'd have to go read thousands of pages to see, is any of the stuff that's inside here any good?
So this would be a bit like a situation where you say, I have a client base and they have a net worth of $1 billion, but what's not being disclosed is that there's like one billionaire and 100 people who are worth bullshit and with problems
Yeah.
that could go wrong.
Yeah.
That
So
sort of
there
thing.
you have one level of abstraction that hides the bad stuff or the good stuff. You just don't know really what's happening. The money has been abstracted by one higher iteration, and that's just level one. What happens is we have another nice friend that has more money than I do, and he looks at and grabs all my super fun investment fund products, because I have several, and some from other people that are lending money to people that shouldn't have money, and wraps them up in a new investment package. So now you have a second level of abstraction. So you have to basically do forensic accounting for a year before you'd figure out that actually, the people that have been loaned money to can't pay it back.
Mm-hmm.
And there's
And
multiple
that keeps happening.
layers above that. Yeah. And the more level of abstractions you have, and the more the people involved themselves don't actually know at all what they're selling and whether it's good or not.
So,
And that's not just in investments, that's in all sorts of things that is happening in that kind of world. And that's just, that's the Big Short, right? That's what happened. And that's just one example of how money is abstracted away from what it actually is for, to such a degree that you can have, let's say, the fund of the fund of the fund suddenly go up in value 20,000%. But the mortgages haven't changed. Those are real people paying back real loans. It's never going to be more than that. So they can't be worth. Doesn't matter what you value them at, perceived value versus non-perceived value. It will never be worth more than what those people can pay back from their wages.
So
right?
let's also say, like, what is the motivation for the people who like to buy debt? Because that sounds counterintuitive immediately. And I think there's a simple answer, which is they get paid interest. Is that right?
They get paid interest. And over the short term, there's advantages because you make money on the short term. And we calculate whether you're worth anything in society, whether as a person or as a banking or hedge fund, by how much more money you made than the same quarter the previous year. So all you have to do to be valued and to get promotions and to get your bonus and to get a pat on the back by the government is to make sure that this March you made more money than the previous March. That's it. Doesn't matter if it means you're going bankrupt in April. There's no incentive. And so it's a kicking the can kind of down the road kind of approach to making money, because all they want and all they're focusing on is, can we make more money than last year, this period? Mm-hmm. There's no 10-year worth investment. There's no, like, if we do this, couldn't things go pear-shaped? That'll be someone else's problem. Especially because, for example, in 2008, when it all came crashing down, they were bailed out.
Yeah.
The worst we've shown them that the worst consequences is that the taxpayers will foot the bill. So after extracting all their money out of society by making them put money in their passion funds, by not giving them raises and just keeping all the money that, Apple, Tesla, and so on make for themselves, as opposed to for the shareholders, as opposed to for the people building the stuff. On top of that, then taxes go higher. And, there's not enough money to improve healthcare because we've had to bail out banks. And so actually the taxpayer gets a double bill. Not only have they not improved their lives, but then they have to foot the bill for this gambling addict's mistakes.
And so part of the problem here is that the ordinary people are sort of to be protected by the government, whether, like, I don't know if this works as a parallel, but let's say the companies that run the train network just completely cock everything up. They spend all this money, it goes totally wrong, then they collapse, which happens plenty of times in the UK. But because ordinary people want to use the trains, the government will step in and clear up the mess, and maybe they bail out those companies or whatever, because the trains need to keep running. So they can fuck around as much as they want, but ultimately there are people, the train users, or the people who have mortgages, the people who don't want their life savings to disappear. The government's like, well, fuck, that would be insurrection. So we'd better bail them out. But ultimately, when a government does that, it's the taxpayers who fund the government, and so they fund this situation. So why is this now happening, that this has become the common thing, whereas before it wasn't? Or is that wrong? Is it before it was the same, but it's just getting worse? Why? It's
happened before in society. I mean, it's something that often happens because the people that have real power in society will build a system in which what they do isn't criminal. If they get to make the laws, and they do, there's proof. I've talked to someone that lobbies for some really rich people. Talk, when I say talk, via text. But essentially, there's a couple of laws that got passed that were specifically for one billionaire to avoid tax on one purchase.
Yeah.
And it just gets inserted in a larger bill. It's very specific. If you read it, like, what is it? Why? Why is this? And it's to benefit one person specifically. And that's because they can afford to pay someone $10 million to avoid paying $1 billion. That's a bargain. That's the other effect of money becoming free speech, right? When there's no limit to how much money you can put into things, and money is all we value, it means that those that have enough of it essentially become kings. You can't compete with someone with $1 billion, because if each of his dollars is one vote, then you only have one. And suddenly being your vote is as good as mine doesn't count if money can talk. And this is what we've seen, for example, in America when they allowed money to be free speech. I can't remember the name of the ruling. There's a specific Supreme Court justice ruling that allowed there to be basically no restrictions on companies and individuals using money to buy political ads and things like that, which led to dark money, essentially. People funneling money secretly to pay for messages they're interested in to try and get votes for ideas or politicians that they want.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why it's becoming more and more dangerous each time, because the rules are getting more and more relaxed for them to make bigger bets with less consequences. Each time we have this crash and boom, there's less to act. We don't do what happened after the Great Depression, which was sort of give the middle finger to the rich, the end of the gilded cage kind of era, the robber barons and that type of stuff, where suddenly in America there was actually a 70%, I think it was, maximum tax rate. People don't realize there was one politician that got laughed out of like some sort of interview, basically drilling some Danish person or politician, talking about the advantages of socialism, basically. And this guy's like, name me one country with a top rate of like this much that implemented it, and they had great success. And the guy's like, your country, the United States, the boom in the 50s, the huge amount of monetary power that led to your country being the free leader of the world was directly from the raising of the tax rates on the super rich and making sure that they didn't have as much power as before.
So it's like the economic version of trying to keep society not horrifically imbalanced, where someone just gets more and more powerful, and the expectation in a balanced society is, therefore, they should do more for the rest of us because they have done so well. They should invest in things that are beneficial to people who have less. And if they don't, then they're not popular and they get thrown out or, investigated and pulled down. But now we're in a culture which is more, you've made an incredible amount of money. Hooray, well done. That's a sign that you're worthwhile, but without an expectation really that you're going to do anything. Maybe you set up a little foundation that doesn't do anything, and that's it. So there's also a mentality shift.
Kind of, it's that sort of, what do you call it? Protestant puritanical kind of attitude of, if you are rich, you deserve it. And if you're poor, you deserve it.
Mm-hmm.
So
as in a moral judgment attached to it.
Yeah, it must be your fault if you're poor. And if I'm rich, if I'm 1 billion times richer than you, I'm 1 billion times better than you. That's the only answer. That's the only possible thing. The people truly believe that. And they don't realize just when you try to, why should billionaires exist? I mean, on paper, you think, oh, why shouldn't people be that wealthy? But then you kind of realize a billionaire could be spending 50,000 pounds, I think it's a day, since the birth of Christ, before running out of money. Something like that. There's a couple of diagrams showing you just how much more 1 billion is than 1 million. And it's insane. Like, sorry, not from the birth of Christ. Just a 1 billion,
I was thinking that can't work out.
I think it's from the discovery of the Americas till today. 50,000 a day from that day. Something like that. And Jeff Bezos, basically, it's like from if to lose all his money, he would have to spend that much every day since the beginning, of history. We'll find the actual diagrams because they go over the maths properly rather than my bombastic explanation, and then you can get an idea.
So 1 billion is 1,000 million these days. Is that correct? Okay, because it's easy to lose track. There was a previous different counting in like
Right,
the
right.
UK
Oh,
or
European
Western
countries
Europe.
counted it differently. Yeah, yeah. So,
Yeah,
yeah. So Italians and French had a million, a milliard,
a
a
milliard.
billion, and a
Yeah,
billiard.
yeah.
You know,
So there
things like
was
that. So there was different tiers. But yeah. So
so
we're in this kind of accelerating stage, and we are at a point where I think it's going to come crashing down again because the underlying fundamentals that support the existence of the economy are so far out of whack with the reality of, you know, between the stock market and what people are actually doing, that it's inevitable that it'll crash. But it's going to crash sooner rather than later because of specifically a few really stupid bets that they've made.
okay,
And that's
we
where,
can talk about those, but first, what are we meaning? What are you meaning when you say the economy? Because I feel like most people have a loose understanding of that. We throw it around, and you've just been saying that
right.
stocks and shares are where this money is, but that doesn't really connect to our lives. How does it connect with like
No.
the price of food? How does it connect? Like, what does it mean to say
So
the economy when we talk about these
yeah.
abstractions?
So we've already seen inflation rising massively, and it's only going to get faster. Because to prop up the 2008 crash, most world economies have been doing what's called quantitative easing.
A
And basically,
buzzword.
it's creating extra money in the system through the way they loan banks from the central bank out to the other banks. It's done in such a way, and you can go and read it better, 'cause I've read so much information, but it's so complicated. By the way, by design, all of this is complicated by design to keep most people away from understanding it. It doesn't have to be this complicated. The names, the acronyms, the way it's explained, it's obfuscated to try and put you off understanding it. But the central banks, through the government, have been creating new money that doesn't exist and putting it into the system to make sure that there's enough money to go around for everyone's bank accounts, for loans, you know, for new businesses, because banks were running out of money and they were going to go bankrupt. And they've been doing this pretty steadily for the last 10 years. That means that there's a whole lot of extra money in the system. And when there's more money in the system, value of money goes down. That's what inflation is. So suddenly, the price of bread is 5 quid instead of 2. Now we're seeing an acceleration in this. And the central governments have been trying to stem it, but you can't fuck with it too much because they still have the original problem that set it off, so they can't reduce the money supply directly. So now they've got, what they're doing is basically buying the money back from the banks temporarily and giving them treasury funds, which is
Okay, so
essentially what
this
the
is like
economy
guilt.
is.
Is that what a guilt
Which
is?
it's a loan from it's essentially like a bet that the government will still exist 10 years from now, or
Yeah,
1 year
so
from now, or a day from now.
I learned about this only recently. So the notion is when, like, the British government says we need funding to deal with COVID, and we need to, pay people salaries if they can't work and things like that. So they say we have created these gilts, these government-backed debts, these IOUs, and then say,
Yeah.
then anyone buying these, like they're saying, hey, why don't you buy this certificate that says that the British government owes you this much? And then companies or other countries or whatever can buy that. So now they have cash in hand.
Yep.
And then the bet is simply, do you expect the British state to collapse? Because if not, this is a very safe bet, and you're going to get,
Correct.
the thing is going to continue to hold its value. You will get your money back eventually, even if it's a long time from now.
Yeah.
So that's
So
one
that's
way
how
of like
the
making more
governments
money.
governments are trying to keep inflation down by extracting all the extra money they created back into treasury funds overnight. One of the greatest signs that something's going to happen soon is that the American Federal Bank, which, by the way, I've recently learned is not actually, it's government regulated-ish, but it's
Yeah,
a
it's a
private company.
It's very American.
Yeah, it's insane. Anyway, we can go down all sorts of rabbit holes. So they're issuing and receiving back cash for, it's now almost 600 billion a day. It's the highest it's ever been. Anytime it was even this close, it was right before a pop, percentage-wise. And the only time it was ever this close in actual number was 2008, right before the crash, where it was under 500. It was something around 500, but not quite 500. It's now 575 or something like that billion per day, that in reverse repo, it's called. And you can go look up reverse repo. There's a whole like Wikipedia page and Investopedia page on it. And once again, it's super complicated. Every time I read it, I think I got it. And then I walk away and I'm like, wait, the banks give out the trade? No, it's like, oh shit. Because it's just so stupid and abstracted. It doesn't make any sense in reality. It's literally just a game of musical chairs with things that don't exist. Anyway, so that's another big clue that things are not well. That number is skyrocketing. So there's something that the banks need a lot of liquidity and in assets for. Because, by the way, I've learned that to a bank, your cash is a liability. Because of inflation and because of the fact that it's going to lose the money in the long term unless they invest it in something, and but they have to have a certain fraction of it available as cash to be able to make sure that people can get money out, basically.
So this is the notion that if you just have your cash under the mattress, it's losing value because prices continue to rise. Money loses its value. That's why you would hope if you're in a good job, you get a certain percentage increase that's meant to track inflation, like a raise each year. So this is why people who want to make sure that they make money rather than lose money, or at least stay stable, put it in, well, savings accounts used to be a thing, not so much now, but put it in investment portfolios.
It's tied to that, by the way. The savings account not being that useful is tied into the quantitative easing because they want interest rates to be low to be able to make sure that there's money going around in the system. So if interest rates are high, people keep money in their savings, and therefore the economy doesn't run. Because we're at a point where they're having difficulty, they're intentionally keeping the savings rate to like nearly 0% to make sure people spend.
So, but my question then is, you say the US government is trying to, if I understood right, put more cash into the system. Is that right? The 600?
It was up until recently. This reverse repo thing is trying to make sure that whilst they're injecting cash into the economy, there's not too much cash around to cause inflation. So they're taking the cash back out of the banks in exchange for these temporary treasury funds in this kind of reverse. It's so
temporary
complicated
treasury
and
funds
stupid.
are like these certificates we mentioned, like the gilt thing, saying it's a we owe you.
Very
eventually.
short term. They're overnight treasury loans in exchange for the bank's liquidity, and vice versa.
So
they also do the opposite.
So you're saying this is too complex, so let's just put it aside a moment ago. You're saying this is a bad sign. What is it a bad sign of? Well, I mean, you said
It's
a
a
crash,
sign
but why?
that the banks are struggling. Yeah.
And what are they trying to
achieve? They
achieve?
need to do this. They're trying, I believe, to avoid the banks getting margin called. And I can explain what that means. So a margin call is, so by the way, banks and hedge funds work on leverage in most societies. And some countries have bigger. Okay. So that means that I can invest, let's say, and up to recently, it was even maybe 20 times. So let's say I got £5,000 and you let me invest not £5,000 in your nice loan or shares or whatever scheme as a bank or as a hedge fund or whatever. You let me invest 20 times the amount of money I have.
How does that make any sense?
Because you think I'll be good
for
for
that happen? Oh, so I'm making a bet that
it's credit. It's
time,
essentially credit.
Okay, so I'm looking at you and saying, please invest in my shit. I think you're a good bet, so I'm going to allow you to ostensibly have 20 times more credit with me than you have the funds for.
Yeah.
So I'm
and
like
this
a credit
multiplies,
card.
right? Yeah. So if the federal government does it to the main banks, the banks do it to the smaller banks, and those do it to the hedge funds, the layer of multiplication can get quite large, right? So a bet down the road can have huge repercussions up the road. Okay? So there are rules about how much collateral someone has to have at hand to offset their bad bets that are perhaps long-term. So you have one investment that right now is negative $1 million. You have to have, I don't know, let's make it even. You have to have a positive million in your other investments, so you cancel out to zero.
Okay.
So that I know, even though you technically don't have a million, because I let you invest 1 million into good things and another million into bad things, you're still at zero. So you're not going to be a problem for me. If you only had the negative million and you go bust, I owe the negative million as the person that lent you the money.
Okay.
But if you're at net zero, I don't care you've made a bad bet. Worst case scenario, I take your positive shit to sell your good shit, to offset your bad shit.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what a margin call is: a call from the bank or the lending institution or whatever it is that allows you to do your trades, saying, you fucked up enough that I might need to close your account, sort it out, increase your position, add more money or more shares to offset your bad ones. Your bad ones are too low.
And you're
That's a
saying
margin call.
this is what banks are doing. That in their investments or their loans or everything else, they're also trying to be at zero and not potentially at the situation.
I mean, ideally they want to be in positive. Ideally, they want to be in positive. But I think they're getting close to net zero, which, by the way, that would be an instant liquidation, I think. So there are rules around that as well. But you have a few days if you get a margin call to fix it, basically. At the end of market day...
Isn't there a Kevin Spacey movie called this?
Yes.
That I've been hearing
and I haven't
about.
watched it yet. But apparently it's on the list of things that you should watch, if you're interested in this sort of thing.
If you don't want to sleep at night.
Yeah. So what I think has been happening is that banks and hedge funds are very, very close to being margin called, or are being margin called. And the way that it's fixed is they take out extra stuff from the federal bank to be above, basically keep their lips just above the water. And that the amount that they need is increasing. Yeah, main banks are getting margin called, I think.
But by whom?
This is no confirmed. Well, a bank is beholden, for example, to a market maker, or depends where the investments are. Okay, so there's banks, there's hedge funds, and there's market makers. Market makers are the companies that facilitate the trading in some way or shape or form. But then they can also have their finger in another pie. So a market maker can also have a hedge fund potentially be part of this. So it's all very incestuous and weird. And it's hard to follow the trail unless you've been in this for very long. And I'm very new at this. So the amount of information I learn per day, like some days I kind of have to take a break just to kind of try and reorder all the thoughts in my mind, because it's just, it's insane. It's literally insane what we've allowed people that run our world to do with how money works.
So,
it's
because
crazy.
this is as you say, horrifically complex, let's talk about GameStop. Let's get specific about this. So for those, now we have to explain short selling. So people probably heard about GameStop. If the equivalent, I think, in the UK to like an elsewhere electronics boutique, a video game company that suddenly became its stock price went through the roof because of a groundswell grassroots action to stop people short selling, which would have put it out of business because they could make money by destroying this company. So let's see if I can remember what short selling is.
Okay, go on.
Okay, so I've learnt it a couple of times, and then like you gone, was it who does why? So let's have a go and see how it goes. I think it's worth knowing of people because we hear about it all the time, but we don't really understand what it is mostly. So let's say you own 100 shares in a company. So let's say in GameStop or GME, because that's easier to say. Mm-hmm. You own 100 of those, and I think that I can make some money off this. So I come to you and say, hey, I want to have your 100 shares, sort of borrow them, but I think for me it's important to recognize that I am taking possession of them, but I need to give them back to you. That's mm-hmm. the agreement. So I take those 100 shares and I decide I'm going to sell them off at the current price. And I expect that by the time that I've agreed to give them back to you, I can buy them at a cheaper rate than I sold them for. Because in part, by people selling them, it drives the value down because it looks like, oh, look, everyone's selling. I'd better sell too. Fuck. And then I have managed to be paid for them quite a bit. And then when I buy them back for pennies or whatever, I've got a tidy profit for myself. I give them back to you. Why would you do this for me? Because I have to pay you some money for this. There's it sounds like it's
interest. You pay interest.
I pay interest, and if I don't give them back to you in time, I'm super fucked because I have to owe you the interest, and you have to get the stocks back because that's the agreement.
Shorts
is that right?
Must deliver. So it's not just that you're fucked because you will always have to return the share back. You have an obligation.
Yes.
You can't not return it. The only time you can not return it, and this is what their incentive is in destroying companies, is if the company goes bankrupt and gets delisted off the exchange.
Because then it doesn't exist
then you don't
anymore.
have to return the share.
So I can't give it back to you. So people
that's
who
their
are
ultimate
short
goal.
sellers, they're seeing the opportunity to say, hey, I think this company is currently overvalued. Or is that right? Well, I think the shares are worth more than they should be. And I also want to kind of push it off the cliff by saying sell, and my other short
that shouldn't be the
pals.
case. It should be just a bet against the future of the company. It shouldn't be used as a weapon, but it is used as a weapon because they do all sorts of other things in concert with it. And there's now good evidence, by the way, that this particular round of short selling sort of attacks on mostly more brick and mortar things is coordinated with Amazon. Because Bezos has got good links to these particular hedge funds that have been doing it. It's an intentional move to cripple existing brick and mortar stores that were having difficulties with transitioning from the digital resolution to take over their business, basically, and destroy them, and make them disappear. They did it to Blockbusters. They did it to Toys R Us. Toys R Us in particular, there's evidence that it just got shorted to oblivion and made it disappear. But in particular, during this pandemic, they tripled down on it because they were like, yes, this is going to destroy retail. And with our help, all these companies are going to go down. They're going to go bankrupt. We don't have to pay them back. All we have is money for nothing.
So
and
they
that's
don't
what's
have
happened.
to pay
It's
them
not
back
just
if
GameStop.
they go out of business.
Correct.
And
All
it's called
retail,
short
pretty
selling.
much.
Why? It's called short selling because it's a short-term thing. Because is that why? Because I owe you your shares back within a short period of time.
I don't know. I actually don't know if that's. It could be just you could be selling them short. I don't know. I don't know. I feel like I would be talking out of my ass if I say what I think it is. So I think that's something we should look up.
Okay. So when people are in the business of
that's
short
just
selling,
normal short selling.
Okay, but that was, if we're talking about GME, just in an everyday sort of way, enough people who want, or hedge funds or whatever, wanted to short the company because they thought this company is not going to do very well, retail, whatever, we can make some money by going, hey, and people who own shares in GME, loan them to me, I'll give them back to you, I go sell them, oh look, the value's gone down, I buy them back really cheap, I give them back to you, I've made money, you've made money because I had to pay you interest, but GME, the company, is fucked. And these people don't care. But that's not what happened because... Tell the story.
Okay. But there's more to it. So short selling is not all that happened to GameStop. What happened is another layer of it, which is called naked short selling.
Okay.
Now, I don't know if hedge funds are technically allowed to do it, but market makers I know are. So you want to short sell GameStop. I don't look for a share. I just lend you one, and then I have something like 21 days to find it.
So this is where it gets
essentially,
weird,
I've created a share that doesn't exist.
So you've lied. Essentially, you've lied.
Yes,
you've
that's
said,
what people are saying. It's a lie.
But this is... I've heard this, but I don't understand it. Like, how can then you've said you've got like 10 shares, for example, but you don't. You have 10 days to have them. Then you've said to me, I'm loaning them to you, and I'm like, I will give them back to you. I'm going to. But without ownership, without either of us actually owning these shares, how is it possible for me to go on an exchange and sell it?
Because the market makers and the system infrastructure is built for when things used to be paper, right? To make sure the system was quick. You couldn't wait to get a certificate to sell it on, because the company might go bankrupt before then. So there was certain freedoms allowed to basically be good on your word. I told you I sold you this. I'll go find it. You're allowed to do whatever you want. You have a real share because I told you, and I'm allowed by the government to say that your share is real to make sure that the economy flows. That was already a problem with paper anyway, because sometimes people might fail to keep their word, maybe not even through fault of their own. But with high-frequency trading over the internet, you can make bets that are ludicrously large that then you could fail to deliver. And that's what's FTD, failure to deliver, are problems.
This is very disturbing because we can understand, say, if you say to a builder, I would like you to, or maybe not even a builder, but a painter and decorator, I would like you to paint my house. And they're like, I want you to pay me up front. And you're like, fine. They don't currently have the paint or the material because it's specific for you, but we can trust enough that they will go and get that paint. The paint is available, it's there, it's not hard, it's like whatever. But here we're in a situation where, say, you can't just get paint. You couldn't get this paint saying, yeah, I'll do it for you, I'll do it for you. You don't have the materials, and now it doesn't happen.
The naked short selling only pays off if the company goes bankrupt. They were so sure it would go bankrupt that they did it because they didn't care if they didn't find the shares, because when it goes bankrupt, it doesn't matter. What they've done, I'll give you a metaphor for this because I read a really good one, is essentially someone comes up to a car dealership and says, I'd like a 19, sorry, that's too old. I'd like a 2019 BMW. And the guy goes, perfect. Here's the deed to that car. And he does this 20 times with the same deed. And then he goes, shit, I better go find that car. And then he fails to find that car. And 10 people have the ownership of that car that doesn't exist because he failed to find one because it got sold out because for some reason it became popular again.
It wasn't a deed to a specific car.
GME becoming popular again.
He wasn't trying to sell the
that
same
model.
That model, okay.
Well, it gets a bit weird because, it's with the whole, it's not a perfect metaphor, but there's 10 people that own something that he can't find. Okay. Because once stock increases in popularity, people buy but don't sell, and the price goes up. These people, in particular, there's one company in particular, the market maker called Citadel, who routes and organizes 40% of all retail trades in America. If you do a share trade in America as a normal person using like a cool app, your trade will go through the Citadel market maker. That's what they are. Mm-hmm. That's what the name of the company is. This company, has, we think, based on some of the numbers, it's not sure yet, but the people have done some extensive studies, and that's what the Reddit community is all about. It's now, it's one in particular that's really good at the moment called Superstonk. And it's got hundreds of thousands of people from all over the world, clever people that are into law. There's lawyers, accountants, there's investors, there's just normal mom and pop people that invested some money. There's gamers, obviously, because GameStop is a gaming company. But together, they analyze data at a prodigious rate using groupthink. And so there's a bit of evidence, an interesting amount of evidence, that the naked short selling, the over short selling of GameStop is potentially something like 2,000 or 3,000%. That is,
so you're saying
30 times more shares have been created than exist. And people have bought them and they're not selling them. So the market maker is paying prodigious amounts of interest and having seriously large failure to deliver penalties that it has to hide, using its ability as a market maker to kick the can down the road by hiding them into long-term investments, essentially, and basically increasing the interest it pays exponentially every 21 to 35 days, trying to survive another day, hoping that they'll sell trying to do more short attacks, creating more naked shorts to try to drive the price down to make sure people sell, so that it does go bankrupt, so that they don't have to pay back this really bad bet.
Because if it goes bankrupt, no one has to give the shares back because it doesn't exist. The shares actually disappear
Correct.
at that point. Okay, so I hope people are holding on. I feel like I'm holding on by my fingernails just to this. What doesn't make sense, and I recognize the point is it doesn't make sense, that's why it's a problem, is, say, I would have imagined, and I think most people would imagine, that if you are a company and the company has 1,000 shares, that then if people are doing the naked short selling and saying, you know, I will get these shares, I'm loaning them to you, you owe them to me, you go and sell them, the short selling thing. But in fact, they can't get hold of them. So now there's 10,000 apparent shares, even though there's only a real 1,000 shares in the company. Why is it that we can go onto our Revolut app or whatever other trading app, and there can be 10,000, I mean, not 10,000 people, but let's imagine that we all have one share. There can be 10,000 people who officially have a share because they've bought it. It's been traded. It's there. How can it be that it says on the official ledger that there are 10,000 owners of shares and the company and its listing as to what it's made up of says we have 1,000 shares?
Oh, there's no official ledger like that. You don't know how many shares there are as a company out in the wild. You can't see it.
I'm sorry, what?
Correct. Because of how the market works and because of how each market that can sell shares is independent, there's no centralized way for a company to know how many of its own shares exist at any one time.
I thought the whole point of when you float a company, you say, we're releasing 10,000 shares.
Yeah.
That's what exists. This is our cake,
But
and we
after
put
that-
it 10,000 ways.
After that, if some asshole somehow creates 1 billion more shares, you have no real way of seeing it directly unless they make a mistake, like, you know, sell 1 billion at one time so you can see it. You don't know. You don't have that visibility. So that one of the things they've done is do a shareholder vote. Because for that, every single company that has shares on behalf of customers has to give the ability for the customer that has the share to vote on the board member choice or whatever the company's doing. That was one tricky way they did to try and figure out how many shares are out there. And they did it recently. And since they've done it, they started tweeting very aggressively in a way that's basically not saying, but hinting that they know that there's naked shares out there. They were quiet for a month. GameStop. For a month, their Twitter account didn't tweet anything because they didn't want to be accused of market manipulation. So they didn't tweet for a month, their GameStop account. That suddenly, on the day where the first set of share results counts was going to come back, by the way, not all of it, just a small percentage of the initial vote came back. On that day, they started tweeting stuff that was kind of doing a sideways wink at the shareholders that there's definitely a problem.
Okay,
they posted they posted some of the memes the community was posting, and they posted something that was kind of like, yes, there's, you know, but then they're like, oh, sorry, we actually meant this, and it's quite clear that they have received a vote that shows that there's more votes than shares, which could only happen if there's naked shorts.
Okay, so I want to make this a vivid picture. So let's say we have a company, we're like GameStop in this situation, and we said there's 1,000 shares, and then we've released those out into the market. 1,000 people came along and bought one share each. Now a bunch of those people went off down the street and started knocking on doors and saying, hey, would you like to buy some shares? In fact, they only own one, but they sell 10. Let's say. So these people who've just bought these think that they now own 10 shares in GameStop, but the person who sold them didn't actually own those shares. So this delusion continues, and we at GameStop have no idea what those people did when they went down the street and started making these extra things, these lies, essentially. And so you're saying that one way to find out what's happened is say, okay, all my shareholders, they get to vote. So I'm going to do a vote. So let's go and sit on our front lawn and wait for the 1,000 people who own a share each to come. And a city of people arrives saying, I own a share. Now, from the company's perspective, that shows there's a big problem. But how is that for them? Because suddenly the value of their shares seems to be very high, which I guess you want as a company, but it's based on a set of lies. How are they feeling about this? There's all these people who say I'm a shareholder and you're like, I don't see how you can be.
Yeah. So it's a problem for them, but they're using it to their advantage. So their new chairman, and one of the reasons why GameStop, even without this clusterfuck, would be worth more than it is now a year from now. Minimum $500 a share, I think, based on their plans that they have. This guy called Ryan Cohen started a company called Chewy that revolutionized the pet, like kind of retail. It was online pet retail stuff, food, pet products, and so on. It eventually got bought by, I think it was called PetSmart, a traditional pet retail. Anyway, and he made billions from that and became the largest Apple shareholder, single shareholder. He sat on his ass for a bit, probably thinking what his next move was. And last year, he invested a whole lot of his Apple money, quite a lot, into GameStop and became a very large, I think maybe even the largest single shareholder in that. And he started taking steps to revitalize the company because it's actually got really good retail locations. It's got a good fan base of people that love it. And he saw potential. And so he's been making moves to improve it. And one of the things he did was when he started, making these improvements, and also there was a new console cycle. So the new Xbox and the new PlayStation came out, which always leads to massive sales for gaming retail increase. Mm-hmm. Okay, one of the reasons GameStop wasn't doing so well because we are at the end of a console cycle, and then there was new console cycle, so they'd be making billions of that. So all these things combined raised the share price, and plus then people put money in, so the price went up. And then the hedge funds started attacking it to try and reduce the price down. So people figured out there was naked short sales. So they've been holding and not selling. So based on that and the increase in share price, Ryan Cohen was able to get the board to issue a few million more shares onto the market. And they did it secretly and quietly and raised money to wipe out GameStop's debt. So GameStop has zero debt now. And on top of that, they've raised enough money to fund their revitalization into the digital sales market, into esports. So they're going to run, those kind of people playing video games competitions. They've associated themselves with gaming brands and with Microsoft. They're going to deal with Microsoft, all sorts of things, which is increasing the share price. So they're actually trying to make GameStop like the next Amazon for entertainment. That's kind of the plan anyway, regardless of what the hedge funds do. But they need to get control back of the company by reducing the shares. So what they're doing is taking steps to make sure that they're as insulated as possible without being accused of causing the whole economy to collapse. When eventually the hedge funds will have to pay back because the interest rate will exceed their margin and they'll be margin called, which is going to happen.
And so the reason why this one game company could have such an effect is because of this series of doubling down of the people who have this Citadel and others that have kept saying, oh, we have more shares, and they don't. Yeah. And they actually need to buy them. But if people like you and these Reddit communities have bought the shares, won't sell them, the price remains too high, so the Citadel and others are they are having to pay huge interest rates because of penalty rates because they're meant to have provided shares that they don't actually own. And the price is so high that for them to buy what they need would be a serious problem as well. And you're saying that over time, because the people aren't selling, that these large financial
they're making
trading
it exponentially
institutions,
worse.
Yeah, and they own lots of other things. That if they fall apart, it's a bit like a bank collapsing in terms of the knock-on effects for all sorts of other investment portfolios, people's pensions, I assume, and other things.
Yeah. They'll have to sell their people's investments in their. So, for example, Michael Burry, the guy that's one of the Big Short people, the one that's autistic with one blind eye that starts the whole thing in the Big Short.
Dimly, who was he
Remember
played
that guy? By Batman.
Okay.
Christian Bale. Yeah, Christian
Okay.
Bale.
So Batman is the guy.
Yeah, so this Michael Burry guy actually was one of the reasons that this whole thing started in a way, because he thought GameStop was undervalued and wrote them an open letter to the board of directors saying, you guys should do this to revitalize yourselves. And he was invested in GameStop. And, it leads to other people taking interest, and that's a whole other rabbit hole. But the other thing he did was in January or February, he was tweeting about how crazy it was because he realized just how problematic the short selling it was. And he got a visit from the feds, and then he stopped tweeting about it. And he's no longer got shares in GameStop. I think he doesn't want to be associated with the second failure of the economy, because he actually got a lot of shit for that first one.
Because he called it. Like, why would the feds come?
I think because the feds know. I think the SEC knows that this is a problem, and they're trying to kick the can down the road. They've been implementing more and more regulations to try and minimize the damage. They know it's going to happen. They can't stop it, but they're trying to minimize the economic damage and basically insulate responsibility as much as possible. So they've been adding new regulations and new rules, and they didn't want it to get triggered too soon, I think.
So if you're a government, the US government, there's this US company, it potentially can cause a financial cataclysm. Why can't they just come in and say, we're freezing trading on this particular company for the greater good? Why can't they do that?
The minute you do that, every single foreign investment in the US markets will pull out because it's too risky. You basically say, if our guys fuck up, we'll protect them to the detriment of the investor. That would be the end of the American supremacy economically, instantly. People would no longer have faith in the American markets. They need this to play out.
Okay, so if that's not an option, why can't the American government, feds, but with a big checkbook, come to GameStop, the people who truly control it, let's say the board of directors, and say, we need to fix this. This many shares need to be given to these short sellers so we can stop this problem. We want you to release that many shares and agree only to give it to these people at this price.
The problem is with naked short sales. Yeah, with naked shorts mean that all the shares that the hedge funds will buy back when they're finally having to buy back will be deleted off the system the moment they go through to the hedge fund. The company can't do that because that would delete its shares out of existence.
So their shares would just be deleted off the system because why? Because they
don't
didn't
exist. Because they're extra. You can't have more shares. The reason they are having to pay this interest is because these shares exist that don't exist. They need to delete them to stop having the money problem. So the moment the hedge fund gets these extra shares, until it gets back to 100% shares and not 5,000% or however much, they need to delete these shares that are coming in. So they can only do it by buying from what's called the free float, the freely floating shares. If a company sells the shares that it still has, it's just creating more of the problem. It has to be real trading. So also, it's not in their interest. It would just make the problem weirder in a different way.
Okay. So there is your perception that there is no way out and GameStop is going to crash the American economy?
I think so. So the share price is going to start rising again after the crash last week, which was both from attacks from the hedge funds, but also 5 million more shares were released by GameStop to increase its cash for doing its revitalization sort of moves.
Can I press pause here? Because I don't understand this probably quite simple thing. When does a company only raise money from its shares? Because the share price goes up and down, whatever, that's a perception thing, people buy and sell, whatever, and that's about confidence, right? But the company only gets money in its pocket when it releases new shares, because at that point they are being paid directly. The company is being paid for those shares, and then they have cash to do things with. And then if people buy and sell the shares afterwards, it's sort of incidental, apart from a sort of perception as to whether they get investment after that. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
And the other ways the company can raise money is through private investors or loans from banks. And there's other ways, but in terms of shares, only when they sell new shares do they make money.
And so when we talk
After that,
about,
it doesn't matter how high the share price goes. It's just purely about perception.
how high or
and
low,
confidence.
but it's another head fuck for the average person like myself in this way. Like, Tesla's share price is huge, that must be amazing, but that's other people buying and selling. The only time where it affects the company is if it means their private investors or other investors pull out, let's say, or if they release more shares, no one would want them, or if Elon Musk and other top people, their personal fortune is tied up with what they think they could get by selling on their shares. Yeah. But it's a funny, it's a head fuck game where you're thinking, oh, the share price is super low, the company must be bust. That's not really true. They have what they have.
No.
And then it's about confidence.
That was the whole thing,
whether,
you know?
Mm-hmm.
A company, perception of whether a company is going to do well could go, but when a share price goes too low, people could just, you can get a company bankrupted even though it had solid business plans and fundamentals by bringing its share price to zero.
Because
it creates all sorts of problems for them because they can't raise new money because, you know, all the share options that, you know, they might pay their executives in goes to, it's really weird. Like, you can cause problems, and
it's a bit like
I don't fully understand that part.
So if it say it's WWE, of course, my go-to example. Mm. They say we're releasing 1 million pieces of merchandise. At the point that they sell it, they make the money. And then what happens is, do other people want to buy WWE merchandise or not? And they're just buying, trading, whatever. But if people decide, you know what, no one wants WWE merchandise anymore. These things are worthless. You thought it was your special collector's edition and you hoped you'd sell it one day, but now nobody wants it because of some scandal or whatever. And then for the company, it's a problem because, for example, people don't want to invest. The company's not cool anymore. Their expansion plans for a bigger audience aren't going to work because it looks like no one's into them anymore. And this other thing you said, that maybe for their top executives or people, they partly rewarded them with bonuses of like, hey, here's some of the merchandise we kept back just for you. But they're like, I don't want this shit.
And then also, I think the people that own the shares, like large institutions, might force them to like sell. They'll have enough votes to say to the board of directors, we want you to sell because you're worth, you know, we want to make some money on our return. Here, you know, we've got more than 51% of the company. This is what we want you to do. You know, it gets complex at that point. But there's things that you don't want your share price to go low because there's just so many things that fuck you up.
So it looks like a precipice. We're saying you think it's going to crash the American economy. I feel skeptical about this, mainly because I want to feel skeptical about this. But let's bring this back to a level of like individual people. I don't know how far our audience want to roll with this in-depth thing.
Within the next 6 months, I believe, possibly sooner. I have some idea of what I think might happen. But let's say within 6 months, GameStop share price will keep going up and up and up, and at some point it'll get high enough. And I think that probably around $300, $400 sustained for more than a couple of weeks. After this latest injection of shares into the system to raise probably what's going to be like $1.3 billion for GameStop to execute its plans, there's not going to be more shares issued, I don't think. And there's a really nice graph that shows that normal people are not selling their shares. Mm-hmm. And so it's just going to be the hedge funds continuously trying to use their short attacks to drop the price down. But there's the math shows that their attacks are getting weaker each time. In January, they brought it down from like $400 to $40 in the space, or something ridiculous, in the space of like minutes with their attacks. But because every time they do it, people buy those shares that they create out of nothing. Every single time they do it, they have to pay more interest. And they've been doing this every day for months. So every time they attack it, and every day you can see there's a point where suddenly the price goes down massively for no reason. And you can see that normal people are not selling. It gets weaker. So it only goes down $10 or $2. Like, it's getting smaller and smaller.
How can you see this? How do you know who's buying? How do you know that these funds are doing this?
So all of it is guesstimation, but you can have a look at the data of the frequency of trade. You can see how many trades are being done, at what price they're being done, when they're being done, and how much they swing the price by. So you can see that someone's put out an order for 1,000 shares at 230, and that one person's buying one at 200, and so on. And you can kind of guess which ones are being done by a hedge fund algorithm and which ones are being done by a real person based on prices, based on number of shares, the speed at which the trades are being done. And there's also graphs that somehow estimate change in ownership. There's all sorts of data that people every day, people that are really nuts about this pour through.
Yeah, but people are quite nuts about this. And so when I've seen bits on like Reddit forums of these people who are all talking, who sound like they're all living in someone's basement, and they're like, look for the candle-shaped curve on the graph. Look for when it looks like a penis. Look for like all of this stuff.
There's a lot of
just
meaning
sounds
around
stupid.
as well. Yeah.
It sounds stupid though, and these people, this is like a key point. Why aren't these people all rich if they just understand the market so well?
Oh, well, a lot of these people have learned by the fuckery that's been done to them since January. Some of these people, like a large percentage of these people, didn't know shit about finance. Some of them do. The ones that were there before January, that invested before it went up from $2 or $4 all the way up to 400 suddenly. Those people, and some other people after perhaps, but the people that have the larger bulk of it, including myself, are people that are like, oh, this is interesting. And then like, oh, look, it's gone up $10. I'm rich. And then the next day they bring it down $40. And you're like, what happened? And you go look through the information. And there's people that understand it, explaining it to the others, the crazy ones. And it's kind of built a resilience and it's built an interest in economy. Well, I can't shorthand reading 2 hours worth of data every day for the last
you can't. But this is
done.
where I bring in the big skeptical hammer, which is it's very easy to get in this like cult-like echo chamber of people saying this means this and that. It would be like going into what seems like a university or something, and people are telling you this is how stuff works, but you don't necessarily know if it's true because it's incredibly complicated, and then you're playing the game according to their rules. So for me,
we see small confirmations. Yeah.
Yeah,
and people have been releasing large documents. Sure. But that's where you have to kind of do your own, that's the whole thing, doing your own due diligence. People release like a 10-page document about their analysis, and you go, And the other people, by the way, most of the articles that come out get viciously attacked by other people saying, you think you're wrong, and they have to defend their thesis. It's quite interesting. It's like a really super sped up peer review process, which is really interesting. It's purely on a sociological aspect.
To have opinions. Because they might.
Some of them are,
not.
Some of them aren't. But it's quite interesting. Altogether, it's like a hive mind. I don't know how to explain it. Sometimes there's something someone says and gets debunked. Other times, and there's also been industry experts. So they've started interviewing journalists that have been kind of trying to pursue sort of the financial kind of trickery for decades. People that were journalists. Some people journalists that were even blacklisted, because of their dogged pursuit of hedge funds. One sort of executive member of this company called Citadel has chimed in and corrected a few things and confirmed a few others.
Why haven't they been fired?
They're no longer there. They left a while ago. They've been doing other things. And anyway, so there's lots of people from different sort of worldviews contributing to this. Is it definitely going to happen a particular way? Is all the information correct? Who knows? Probably not.
Well, one of the biggest issues in this is, aside from like people getting swept up in it and putting their life savings in this stuff because a lot of confident-sounding people on an internet forum told them, like that's one thing. And then another thing is that most economists, in my opinion, are full of shit. That like political scientists, they are only right about stuff that's already happened that they can put a model on. And then whenever they try to build a model for the future, that model is already old, it's out of date, it doesn't predict things, and then they're just always making up excuses for why it didn't work as they expected. And sometimes they're lucky, but mostly, if you meet an economist or a political scientist and they say it's all going to play out like this, ignore that person.
Yeah. So, fuck economists, but purely based on our own research. Individually, each person is kind of encouraged to do their own research. But there's a few fundamental things that we know to be true to a high degree of probability. One, that retail owns the float. So that is retail investors own as many shares as there's supposed to be floating around in the market, at least once, probably twice. So that is, people that have been investing in GameStop through Revolut or through like, apps, and they're just kind of, gamers or, idiots like me, like,
So
potentially.
retail investor means real people, like individuals.
Yes. These investors own enough shares that they own all of the shares that are supposed to be floating around available because of the whole short selling thing. A large percentage of us, or the people involved, are not going to sell these shares, and because they want to invest in the company long term. Even if this wasn't the case, they thought there was a company that's going to get better and better, like investing in Amazon in like 2006 or something, or whatever, like before it got huge, when people were telling Bezos that he was an idiot. They're going to hold their shares because we think long term it's a good investment, better than holding it into a bank account. So we're not going to sell. That means that the interest rate and the cost to the hedge funds will grow exponentially, and there'll be a point where it's bigger than anything they're able to cover. At that point, because of how the economy works and because of how their obligations to the clearing body and to the, I think it's called DTCC, and then the DTCC obligation to the federal bank, means that they will be liquidated without a say if it gets above a certain amount. So imagine the largest hedge funds in America no longer being able to say, please give me one more day. The algorithm sells all of their shares and starts trying to buy back the GameStop shares automatically. When that happens,
yeah,
and no one sells, it doesn't matter what, like to the computer, it doesn't matter. The computer will raise the price until someone sells, because it must cover that debt. It has to cover the short.
Why is it a computer? Aren't there people operating these computers?
Not at that level. That level, it's a automatic liquidation kind of level type of stuff. A person might be involved in the choice, but it's actually above a certain level, it's automatic. The computer will make those trades.
That's disturbing.
Because it's too big. It's too big for a person to handle. Because it has to look potentially for millions of sales.
Too big not to fail. So there's a sort of perverse moral question here, right? That retail investors, the likes of us, so we should mention you bought a bunch of shares in GameStop.
I just wanted to participate in the thing. Let's not announce,
just
in case I become an overnight millionaire.
You were telling me about it, so I thought, okay, I'll do it. I'll buy one and treat it as a game for my own interest. Like $100, I thought, okay, if I could lose $100. It's okay. This could be an entertaining thing to like check in on and see what's happening. So for people listening, we're not telling you to buy these things, but if you were going to, for God's sake, just treat it like a little game and be aware you could lose everything that you put into it, because that's investment. That's how it works. The perverse moral question is, by doing so and not selling, because we're playing a game, or you could say more like positively, I believe in the long-term future of this company. This is a good investment. Aren't we crashing the economy?
But if buying and holding shares crashes the economy is fucked. That's the whole point of the economy. That's what we're supposed to do. We're finally doing what we're supposed to be doing.
But what about the rebound
if that crashes
effect
the economy,
on ordinary people?
Just like with The Big Short, the character played by Brad Pitt says, "Don't dance." Don't be happy that you've made money, that it's going to cost people's jobs and homelessness and so on. But I feel like personally, it's almost a responsibility to try and benefit from it and try to rebuild a better society. To as many good people be part of the biggest wealth transfer in history, if this goes through, so that the good people do good things, start a company. I could invest in a tattoo studio up in Scotland, for example, if I wanted,
But it sounds like a revolution, which, you could see is good, but you could also say that revolutions tend to be bloody and it's the poor, regular people who suffer. So does that put us as shareholders of this company in the role, but we're not having to face the consequences too directly? We're not going out and throwing people out of their homes. We're not like this bloody revolutionary carrying around a gun. And yet our actions could have these results. We can say, look at the big picture, everyone. We're going to build a better world. That's a pretty difficult moral quagmire to engage with.
What's the alternative? That we all intentionally sell to tank GameStop and crash it, even though it's a viable business, so that hedge funds are able to profit of their bad bets, and then we just wait for their next fuck up to go through in a different way?
It doesn't feel like either of these are particularly good options.
No. This is not good. This is not a good thing. I'm not happy that it's happening, but you have to have the pragmatism of, this is the reality of the world. What is the best I can make of the reality of this? And also do it in a moral way. I'm not short selling a company that's valuable. I'm not taking money out of people's pockets. I'm investing in a company that I genuinely believe in. And I believe in the chairman, Ryan Cohen, is a fantastic guy. Like any company he's in charge of, I will from now on always invest. I've looked him up. Stellar guy,
so
35, younger than us.
Don't tell people that. I hate him already. So could we liken this, the way you're portraying it, as saying, hey, we want to invest in a green energy company, even though that means loads of jobs and people's livelihoods are going to be screwed in fossil fuels?
Right. It's exactly the same type of thing. I believe that this company and its new board is people with true values that don't want to just kind of destroy society, and they want to create something cool. They believe there's real value in the community around entertainment, around gaming, which, by the way, it's growing larger than any other entertainment. It's already bigger than movies and music. It's going to be the thing. Esports is going to overtake normal sports in terms of revenue, if it hasn't already. It's a growing industry that someone clever could, make really good and do it sustainably in a way that's good to the customer. If you have a look at the kind of reports of customer service from Chewy, the previous company Ryan Cohen was involved with, it's proactive. It's the kind of customer service that you fell in love with Apple or stuff like that. I'll give you an example. Someone posted about someone reaching out, I think even by phone, maybe email, from Chewy saying, your normal order of this particular type of dog food is out of stock. We can't find it anywhere. We're really sorry. We can send you this alternative one, and or give you a credit and like a refund for this one until we find the right one. And they did this before the order went through, like incorrectly. They did it ahead of the problem. They reached out, try to, help the customer out with a genuine concern about the pet and its ability to eat or not eat if the food wasn't the right food.
Does make it kind of funny when it's about the dog food.
Right? No, but, imagine other companies doing that. That's the kind of companies I vibe with. The people that are, they're not like, we're sorry that we cut off your internet, during the call with your dying, aunt, even though you warned us not to, and technically it's our fault, but here's a voucher for 10 quid off, like that kind of like, and maybe that took you 8 phone calls, you know what I mean? Like that kind of proactive, we want to make your life better kind of attitude to business.
But did they not
I want
have
to
the
invest
dog
in
food
businesses like that.
because they short sold it? Was that the problem?
You laugh, like it's a funny joke, but actually, it turns out the guy looked around for that, that was talking about this customer service. He checked all the other kind of food places. It was out of stock nationally. So whatever the company that made that food, they'd run out.
Because
it wasn't just Chewy. Maybe.
So, okay. So this sounds like it can end on a happier note, I suppose. But the problem is that we began with. GameStop is just a very curious concentration of forces which reveals much bigger systemic problems. And we're all kind of part of it, that if you have investments, if you have a bank account, if you have a pension scheme, that what's happening at the beyond your bank and the fact you have a pension scheme is all of these larger trading companies fucking around in a place that isn't really regulated, buying and selling things that either don't exist or have been like packages of packages of packages, and they don't know what's really in the package, and it's a House of Cards situation, the idea, not the TV show, where it's all built on nonsense. And when we talk about things like, oh, the economy's doing well, we're actually in large part discussing something which says it's worth this, but beneath the surface is a load of nonsense because it's not actually based on anything. So the argument being you wouldn't want to, it's not wise to invest in something that doesn't have anything behind it. But this has become the completely common thing to do. And on that point, I kind of just, that was the summary. Now to segue, it's really odd that it's become the norm to invest in things which don't have anything behind them, which I guess you could say is more realistic in the tech world, where like it's not about having things, it exists in the cloud, it exists in these programming kind of things. But then you look at like a company like Deliveroo that had a really shitty entry into the stock market, but it was a stupid thing to want to invest in because what do they actually own? Nothing.
Just
do
an
they
app,
have a
that's
corner
it.
of a market? No. I mean, all they own is a few stickers and uniforms. It made no sense that you would want to invest in that company. And yet, these are the thing. They kind of exemplify what's going on. Like, we have a brand and people like us and therefore we're worth money. Like, well, no. So if you're going to do it invest in anything, what's actually behind it?
Yeah.
It's like
It's
those hustlers online telling you to get into real estate or whatever, and you're like, you don't own any real estate. Why would I invest in you with your talk about something that you don't possess or know about?
Yeah. It's a shit show, and hopefully it will change, because I can't undersell just the extent of the crash that I think is coming. Because they'll have to sell everything else to cover their bad bets. And it's not just GameStop, by the way. They've done it to other companies as well. The moment this goes bust, they'll have to fix the other ones as well. Everything else is going to bottom out. And ultimately, the only way to fix it, if people, like, it could get to the point that so much money is printed that there's hyperinflation, like in the Weimar Republic. Potentially, that could be one of the consequences. People's pensions disappearing overnight, like all sorts of fucked up things. Banks closing, and not being able. Either the government bails them out, and then it's a cost to the taxpayer. We kick the can down the road, or it doesn't bail them out, and people don't have their savings. They can't eat. It's going to be a clusterfuck, and it's compounded by the fact that the people that are fucking up know this, and they're preparing for it. So I just saw an article that showed that BlackRock, one of the hedge funds that is in a big kind of a financial institution in the United States, the one that kind of got gifted basically by 2008 by the United States government to basically acquire and fix all the problems, is growing like a fucking monster. They're in opposition to Citadel, by the way, so they want Citadel to fail. And we want Citadel to fail, really, because they're assholes. But we don't really want BlackRock to succeed, because they're just like an evil overlord, really. If you have a look at what they've been doing recently, is they're buying all the property they can get their hands on, real estate, at 20 to 50% above the market rate, just to be able to win the sale. They don't care, because they know that 50% above the market rate is underpriced, because money will be worth nothing. You have to hold real things to keep ahead of what's coming. So they're prepared. It will be normal people that suffer. The rich will continue to be fine. They're prepared for this because they talk to each other. They know what's coming ahead. They don't tell us until the last minute.
If so if everyone's terrified now, the skeptical response would be that at any point in time, you can look at people who study and focus on the economy, and they're always predicting a massive, massive crash. Always. And then they have their own kicking the can down the road thing going. Like, it's a bit like the Mayan calendar, Nostradamus. Like it's gonna happen. Oh, it didn't happen. It must mean
eventually
it must be
happens.
This. It must be this. And eventually, of course, you're proved right because of the cyclical nature of everything in life. That things go down and they go up, and if they go up high enough, there will be a down. So you've come with knowledge. You've come with stuff that you've studied and so on. But I'm coming with more this more cautious Like, of course, I'm invested in this because I don't want it to happen. It sounds potentially terrible for many people, including myself, as I don't own property and so on. I don't have the brick and mortar situation where you can say, okay, well, my savings are all gone, but at least I have somewhere to live. But this is a thing which just plays out. Oh, the end is nigh, the end is nigh, the end is nigh. It's not a done deal. It's not for sure. We don't know what's going to happen.
I guess not. It's just a case of if you look at human behavior, we didn't put anything in place to prevent this type of greed from reaching an exponential level. So it's going to happen. It is going to happen for sure, because we are not preparing to stop it. I think it's too late. They're putting some regulations on board now, and there's things we could do. I don't think they'll be fast enough, because if you look at the growth of certain things, like we said, the reverse repo rate from the federal government giving money to the banks, taking money from the banks in exchange for treasuries, or whichever way around it is. These kinds of little canary in the coal mine things are growing at such a rate that it only happens right before a crash. So I think it's coming soon. Could it be delayed? Maybe. But not forever, I don't think. It would take a complete, so I don't know, if aliens land and give us, unlimited energy or something, and we get accepted in the United Federation of Planets, fine, we've avoided it. Or if a global war starts and we're worried with that instead, that could also stop it from happening. But I don't think it's going to be like, oh, it didn't happen because we just kept going on and it was just a big overblown thing. I think if it doesn't happen, it's because we got bigger fish to fry.
Or Personally. It doesn't have to be such a cataclysm so much as it's pretty bad, but not as bad as you're saying. Oh, right. Where, say, 2008, pretty bad, and obviously more things could have been done to make it not happen again, but that wasn't really done. And that was a difficult time for a lot of people. Not many jobs, people moving home.
Still is.
So that...
If you think about...
That was bad.
The consequences of 2008 haven't gone away. Sorry.
No, but all I'm saying is it's not the destruction of everything in terms of the economic whatever system, that it's like, well, this is shittier than before, but it's not Mount Doom.
Maybe. I don't think so. But also, I think if that's the case, then I worry about the next one. Because if this one isn't big enough, that there isn't some large systemic changes, that people go, enough's enough, and actually the people that fuck up are held accountable. If we do the same thing as 2008, it's just going to mean another 10 to 15 years before the next one. Eventually, it will be big enough to fuck us over. And we don't want it to hit whilst we're also facing 1 billion people being climate refugees and China and India going to war over water. It'd be better if the big one's now, and we quickly figure out a way to make sure companies don't fuck us in the ass, that it being in 15 or 30 years where we're going to have other bigger problems.
So the ideal is to invest enough in GameStop and cash out at a time that you feel is appropriate. And with that money, go and buy some land. On that land, have a lovely sort of farmhouse built with sustainable, garden, food, make your own food. You're running on solar. I think this is a good plan for many reasons. But that's the direction to think about.
And prepare to band together and get angry against the 1%. Don't let them divide us, because they're going to try to divide people again. And after 2008, it was immigrants. What happened politically after 2008 was a direct reflection of the powerful using the power of the media to divide the people at the bottom from not targeting them for the fuck-ups they've done. Trump is a direct result of the crash, really. People getting angry because they're homeless, because they don't have enough money, because their industries are disappearing, and it's a compounding effect. And being told that the people that they should blame is those brown people taking their jobs. It says it in The Big Short. That's who the guy, Mark Baum, who's a fictionalized version of a real person. The name is different, the real person, but said they'll just blame immigrants and poor people, and they did. So the fuck up is coming. let's make sure we band together and hold accountable the people that did the fuck ups. We need real change. We shouldn't sort of think that we've got another chance at this, because we might not. We have too many points of fragility in society. We didn't fix the climate problem. We are eating all the fish. We are not paying people enough to survive. And we're fucking up economically. Like, it's all coming to a head. And if we don't do something now, the lives of us, our children, our grandchildren are going to be fucking miserable for a long time.
Boom. End of episode. Also, don't have children. Like, that's the biggest single contribution I think you could have to the future of the planet and humanity. But I know you randy weirdo heteros just can't seem to help yourselves. I hope that you're able to solve your own meaning crisis by procreating and saying it's a big deal.
I don't know. It's like biological design, just fulfilling it.
Yeah.
Like if anything,
well, exactly.
You taking advantage of the human experience. You know, that's kind of like what is part of the human experience? This, and this. That seems to be a big part of it.
Oh, it's a big part. I'm just saying it is biology. Don't dress it up and tell me that it's more than that. Like kids,
No.
I've been spending some time with like the kids of my brother and friends. And I'm like, at a certain age, it's quite fun, I suppose. Like they're little humans. They bring back a sense of play and all the rest of it. But also, the world is horribly overpopulated. Don't have these kids. Buy GameStop instead and play some video games. That'll help. Anyway, so I think whilst we could go on and on about this forever, it could get too depressing. But I hope I hope that it's been interesting, because I've been learning just a bit about this, and it's very intriguing to know a bit more than just, oh, GameStop crazy, oh, what's happening, where it just sounds like an abstracted thing, like when Bitcoin enters the fray in the mainstream newspapers, and suddenly your dad's talking about it, but it's just like a little news story. It's more interesting to go a bit beneath the surface and go, oh, that's what's going on, or we think.
And because also, it's been quite clear just how much the hedge funds own the papers. There's been little hints, aside from the fact that you can trace who owns the shares, but like releasing an article about a price drop before the price drop happened, because there's an artificial price drop that they did intentionally. It was like an hour too early, saying the price has dropped the exact percentage. What are people going to do about this? Little things like that. Painting it in a negative light every day, like, and only admitting something after it's too obvious. It's clear that the online, specifically the online media, but media in general, is being used to make sure that normal investors put their money where hedge funds want it to go.
So, to round off, you're not going to sell your GME stock, or are you at a certain point? Like, because otherwise you just put money out, you don't have money back.
So there's this concept of selling on the way down, that people on the Reddit go. If you want to learn this for yourself, by the way, go check out Super Stonk on Reddit.
And look for those candle-shaped curves, everyone.
So the concept is that people hold on to their shares until what's called the floor. So the price that they think they will not part with the shares before this price. Okay? Whatever that price is, you have to decide for yourself. There's a community consensus around a particular figure, but technically it's your own figure. You decide. Once the price goes above that, you don't sell immediately. You just wait until it hits a peak and it starts to come down. And you sell when it hits your floor on the way down from the peak.
And at that point, that's because you would like to make some money from this and be able to do something with it, which is good.
And at that point, everyone is selling. When it's coming down from the peak, it means that people are selling, and the price will go back to what it should be, which would probably be like, I don't know, $500 or something like that. So at that point, you might as well cash out, steal money from the hedge funds, and not be, it would still be a worthwhile investment not to sell, but at least sell a few if you have more than one. And then maybe buy it again if you really believe in the company, which is what I would do.
It is interesting that buying and selling stocks is becoming a little more democratized, for want of a better word, through these apps that can allow you to do it directly. Whereas before you needed like a stockbroker that you knew, or you had to do it with a big company. And now there is potentially this sort of crowdsourced kind of power, but also even if it's not to affect dramatic change at a systemic level, it can also just be that the likes of me can go, oh, I can own stocks. Okay. And maybe I could fuck it up. But I think if you put like a limit in your mind and say, well, let's find out if I'm any good at this intuitively about some of it, and say, okay, I'm going to put aside £50 a month or something like that, and I'm just going to play this like a game. The stakes are real in that I could lose it. So I could say, oh, well, £200. Actually, I wouldn't do that much, but that's, do a figure that you'd be happy to lose. Maybe have like fewer nights out if such things happened in COVID times. But in regular times, say I go to the pub less, and I instead do this. Quite interesting to be able to play this game and potentially win, because it wouldn't. There's not a sense of, like, people are more used to the idea of buying a lottery ticket, but this is a bit better if you're prepared to think through what you want to invest in, because you have a bit more control over what's happening.
Yeah. It's better than a savings account. It really is at this point. 20,
Unless you're really
20 or
bad
30
at
years
it.
ago when I got my... Well, you'd have to pick companies that fail. That's the thing. If you buy with a long-term view, it's rare for you not to make money. You have to buy a real crappy company, because just purely through inflation, the company will be worth more, but money wouldn't. Money would decrease in price. But, you buy a company that you like. Let's say WWE only grows 1% financially, so the share price doesn't grow because of how good they are. But it'll be worth more in 10 years because if they still exist, their share price will be higher, almost definitely. Like you'd have to be really, really bad at it to lose money long term, over truly long term. And that's what you should really be using the stock market for. Anyone that tries to make money in the short term is just basically giving money for the hedge funds and banks to then, siphon it off to the 1%. Warren Buffett says the stock market is a wonderful tool for the patient to extract money from the impatient.
Wait, I don't follow. Someone who is patient, they have patience. So I thought it was patient like in a hospital. I was like, patient and inpatient?
No, sorry. Yeah. I might have paraphrased it, but if you look at the original sentence, it's probably structured better. But that's the idea is that people with patience are the ones that make money in the stock market. The people that are like, oh, I should sell today because the price has dropped. I want it to drop too much. People that do that, they're the ones that end up giving all their money away.
That's the flip side danger of it being accessible through apps, because we're used to apps being let me just check in on this, and then day to day, it's becoming this narrative that you can be reactive to. Where I guess then there's the benefit of if you have a financial advisor person, you're like, look after it for me, and you only get a yearly report on how things are going.
Yeah. Just never day trade, basically. Don't be that person. Invest in companies that you believe in because you think that their company has value long term.
That's sensible investing advice, not something often talked about. Like, how about it's not what's the latest thing, but something I really like, I appreciate, and I've done some thinking about how is society going, what's like, for example, say you like Disney, and you're like, I like Disney, I've always liked Disney, Disney's been around a long time, I think they're going to be around longer, and I quite like the idea of supporting Disney and making some money in the process. Plus, you can then think, if you were deciding when to get in, look, it's COVID. Disney have got a new streaming network. All these people's kids are at home. I think people are going to buy a lot of Disney Plus. Maybe this is a good maneuver. I mean, that's a sort of short-term, long-term together thing. But what I'm getting at is a lot of this is about thinking it through in terms of societal change. What's going on? What do you think is the reality? Like with Deliveroo, you could go, well, they seem to be a popular company, but wait, what do they own?
But maybe you know Deliveroo well because let's say you know the founder personally and you like the team that he's built. and you know that regardless of other apps coming along or whatever, you believe in Deliveroo because you think that that team's a winning team and they'll figure out a way to be on top. And then you invest for that. Like, so
Nah, I wouldn't do that.
No. Deliveroo is garbage, so don't. But I'm saying think like that. Like there's different reasons for why something's valuable long term, and it doesn't have to be the company itself. It can be the team behind the company. It can be all sorts of things. But if there's an unfair advantage and a true value that is long lasting in something, inherent to how it is, then those are the kinds of things that I'll be like, I believe in this.
Which is a nice segue to say thank you for the people who have invested in us, our Patreon supporters. I begin to feel this is not the time for a state of the podcast discussion, but you know, you don't have to give us that money. We're not giving you much for it, but we're glad that you have. But please, no pressure, no ill will. Well, this was interesting, stimulating, and I don't feel like I need to go and hang myself, so I think it came out better than it could have done.
Were you worried that the final podcast?
Absolutely. The devastating horror of it all. So, yeah, there we go. Thanks for listening,
anyway,
everybody.
I think, please, sure.
No? What do you think? What's
no,
the last thought?
I was going to say, keep an eye out on everything in the next, I think, 6 to 8 weeks.
Yeah. You said that to me like 6 to 8 weeks before, so.
I have other reasons now.
Let's keep kicking that can.
It could have happened sooner. But anyway, like that I would get into the details of it. But I would say, anyway, just keep an eye out.
Keep an eye out and be silly, be kind, be weird.